Hi all, thanks for the fascinating debate we had on the previous video about how many moves you calculate in the future. I think the question does kind of carry on this image that the great chess players are somehow these kind of supercomputers able to calculate very far in ahead. But I think a lot of the time in reality masters generally they try and positionally outplay their opponent. And I want to ask the question in this video, can you win games without having to calculate too much? So do you think it is possible just to play, aim to play good strategical chess, trying to avoid the complications of the position where possible, and only when absolutely necessary to convert, your winning position, at that moment to then find the winning tactical combination, but in general to try and make sure a high percentage of the game you're just playing these calm positional moves, riskless, just trying to build on your positional advantages. To demonstrate this idea, I'm going to choose the game Ossip Bernstein versus Raul Capablanca, played in Moscow 1914. So Capablanca was black. So after d4 he played classically, occupying the centre. So c4, e6, Queen's Gambit declined. After knight c3, knight f6. So all of Capablanca's moves so far, well, basically we're in book still anyway, but they're just basically reinforcing black's control of d5. From a strategical point of view, Capablanca's thinking, you wouldn't expect it to have been looking at various combinations, etc. There's nothing going on in the position. And also we're in book at the moment anyway. So let's try and reach what would be, the middle game position. So rook c1, and now the Tartakower defence, b6. So b6 prepares to fianchetto this bishop here, again reinforcing black's control of d5. One of the problems though with this system is that Capablanca now is saddled with hanging pawns if he wants to try and liberate his position later with c5, as we'll see. So after queen a4, bishop b7, white actually here tries to weaken black on the light squares by playing the immediate bishop a6. So was Capablanca that concerned about this? It didn't appear to be that major a problem here. He just took on a6 and now played c5. So he doesn't mind these potential hanging pawns, these two pawns, especially after white takes on d, by d takes c5, b takes c5. So are these pawns vulnerable, and how much calculation would Capablanca have to do here? Some simplification has already occurred though, so white taking on f6 and then the bishops have been exchanged. So we are reaching a more simplified position. Could Capablanca, if you were him, have just carried on this idea of thinking positionally rather than be calculating candidate moves? What would be the positional ideas here? Well, first he plays queen b6. So clearly, if white takes on b6, it would reinforce the c5 pawn and also give black pressure on the a file. So white didn't obviously want that. But now Capablanca plays the move c4. Now I don't really think this is the product of much calculation, because he's giving white the d4 for his knight, but he's potentially now increasing the pressure on b2 without risking things like knight a4, attacking his c5 pawn. So again, it seems to be a logical positional move, also like restraining the b pawn a little bit from moving. So after rook fd1, rook fd8, black has a seemingly comfortable, easy to play position. The only sort of downside is the isolated d pawn. So this blockader with knight d4 seems a bit dangerous. So here Capablanca needs another positional plan. So what does he do? He plays actually bishop b4. He's trying to weaken perhaps white's control of the e4 square, and maybe encourage white to take with b takes. That will give him horrible isolated pawns. But white's not going to do that. White plays b3, so he's going to take with the rook, and he's also actively undermining Capablanca with that c4 pawn under fire. So Capablanca converts though his potential liability into a strength by aiming to create a powerful passed pawn with that c-pawn. And as it turns out, that is the prelude to creating another weakness in the white position later. So after this rook c2, now Capa takes on c3, rook takes c3, knight d5. So far, it hasn't been, as though it will be that taxing for black to have played these seemingly logical moves. But here black is offering the c4 pawn, so there is a little bit of calculation that Capablanca would have had to have done. What does happen if rook takes c4? Capablanca would have had to have seen that actually black has the nice knight c3 here now. So if rook takes c8, knight takes e2 check. And so black's just winning the exchange here, because he would also perhaps have to calculate queen c2 to see if this pin on c8 is dangerous if the knight moves. So say knight takes d1, rook takes c8 is winning for white. So Capablanca in this position has to see rook takes c4. So that's clearly winning. So this seems to be winning the exchange in this line. So white can't take on c4. So this is further actually simplified the position for black now after rook c2, because it gives Kappa this dangerous pass pawn now, which he pushes. After rook dc1, now Capablanca plays rook c5. So this is another seemingly logical move, preparing to double rooks, perhaps, to support the c3 pawn, but also stopping white from using the b5 square. After knight b3, the rook retreats to c6, and after knight d4, Kappa doesn't repeat the position with rook c5, he plays rook c7. So we're in a really simplified position, and it seems, does black actually have enough to win this position? White, he plays knight b5 now, and after rook c5, Kappa is sacrificing that c3 pawn. So this is something he would have had to have calculated by playing rook c7. And he set a neat trap. So for most of the game so far, it's been really quiet, and maybe a lot of people just focusing on their positional play would have been able to play the game up until this point of this rook c7, this winning attempt. So in this position, after this rook c6, this rook c7 is clearly a winning attempt, because it's encouraging white to try and win black's c3 pawn. So that there obviously is calculation now, and it is a nice little combinatory move. After knight takes c3, knight takes c3, rook takes c3, Kappa first takes on c3 here, and in this position, what would you play? I'll give you 10 seconds, or you might want to stop the video here to try and guess Capablanca's next move. So starting from now. Okay, if you would guess something like queen b1 check, it doesn't quite work because queen f1. There's no time for rook d1 skewering the queen because of rook c8. So both sides have got weak back rows here. The way to exploit white's back row elegantly is this queen b2 move, and white immediately resigns here. So if queen takes b2, rook d1 mate. If the rook moves anywhere, then the queen can come in to say b1 check and then just pick up the rook. So queen takes f1 followed by rook takes d3. So it was all over after this. There's no actual defensive move here available to white. There's no time. Both these pieces are unprotected, and white's got a weak back row. So that's an interesting question, really. Can you just win games by trying to play very simple positional chess, and only when you absolutely need to play, a winning tactical combination? Does it depend on things like how much pressure you're under from the opponent, how solid your position is, how many vulnerabilities you have, how much you have to calculate? Please leave your comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.